In the last video, I introduced a framework for seriously thinking about reforms that could shift the Philippines out of the low-level equilibrium we keep finding ourselves in, a cycle of corruption, clientelism, and weak accountability. That framework is from political economy, specifically a game-theoretic way of thinking about politics. We said that in any game, there are a few elements we can change. Number 1, who the players are. Number 2, what strategies are available to them. Number 3, what their payoffs look like. And number 4, the rules of the game itself. Many of the reform proposals we hear about in the Philippines, from anti-dynasty bills to party reform to stronger accountability mechanisms, are really just attempts to change one or more of these elements. Now, I want to pause to emphasize why it's important to even have a framework. Game theory isn't perfect. It's just one way of simplifying the messy world of politics, but it helps us focus. It gives us a way to see where the pressure points are and to track how changing one element could realistically shift outcomes. It's not the only valid approach. There are historical, sociological, and cultural lenses too, but this one is tractable, and it's the lens I'll use to structure this series. So let's start with the first lever, changing who the players are. And here, the most prominent and debated proposal is the anti-political dynasty bill. So let's go back to the problem. The Philippines is stuck in a low-level equilibrium. The politicians who run and win office are often those most likely to engage in clientelism and vote buying. They come into power, not on platforms or ideologies, but on private inducements. And once in office, they use that power to advance their own interests. On the voters' side, especially poorer voters, there's little incentive to move away from this. During elections, they get something tangible: money, goods, favors. After elections, they don't expect much in terms of public goods. Some even feel a sense of debt of gratitude for what they've already received. And for politicians, the calculation is straightforward. Delivering broad public goods won't keep you in power, but delivering private inducements will. So no side has any incentive to change. That's why the cycle keeps repeating. One way out of this, as I said, is to change who the key players are. And that's the logic behind the anti-political dynasty bill. It keeps coming back to the table for two reasons. First, the 1987 Constitution itself instructs Congress to prohibit political dynasties, but it requires an enabling law to define them. Decades later, that law still hasn't been passed. Second, there's rigorous evidence. Ron Mendoza and colleagues show a poverty dynasty trap. Poor provinces are more likely to be dominated by dynasties, and dynasties in turn reinforce poverty. In my own work, I've found that vertical dynasties, families occupying multiple seats at different levels, are especially powerful brokers of clientelism, funneling funds from the national to the local level to entrench their power. Mendoza calls these fat dynasties. So the promise of an anti-dynasty law is simple: break the monopoly of families that capture politics and open up space for new players who might compete in different ways. But what's the track record of this reform? Since the 1990s, almost every Congress has seen anti-dynasty bills filed. Yet time and again, they fail. In 2024, things escalated. Petitioners even asked the Supreme Court to compel Congress, arguing that 36 years of inaction amounts to ignoring a constitutional duty. That case is still pending. Meanwhile, in 2025, the push has been very active. Multiple House bills were refiled: HB 209, HB 2037, and HB 4784 in September. In August, the Senate Committee on Electoral Reforms reopened hearings. Media described the Senate as tackling the issue in earnest. But despite all that activity, there is still no law. And we shouldn't be surprised. Passing this reform requires dynastic politicians to legislate against themselves. Both houses of Congress are filled with members of powerful families, and the current president, Bongbong Marcos, is himself from one of the most entrenched dynasties in the country. Why would they ever pass a law that cuts off the very system that sustains their power? So while the bill remains alive on paper, filed, refiled, debated, in practice, it's stalled. And the obstacle is structural. It asks the foxes to guard the henhouse. But let's play out a thought experiment. Let's say somehow the anti-dynasty bill passes. Suppose Congress agrees on a definition, say, barring relatives within a certain degree from running at the same time, and it's signed into law. Now dynasties are restricted, and space opens up for other candidates to run and win. The hope is that democratic accountability would follow, that new, non-dynastic leaders would behave differently. But here's the problem. Nothing about the incentive structure has changed. You don't need to be a dynasty to buy votes. You don't need to be a dynasty to pocket kickbacks or engage in rent seeking. The rules of the electoral game, plurality wins, clientelist norms, weak accountability, all remain intact. So imagine you're a non-dynasty candidate. You enter a crowded race where you need maybe 20 or 30% of the vote to win. Your opponents are still handing out private inducements. Do you stick to a platform and ideology? Or do you also engage in clientelism, just to compete? The system pressures you to play the same game. And once in office, the same logic applies. Everyone else is rent-seeking. Why wouldn't you? In fact, you may be pressured to conform. So yes, the anti-dynasty bill could change who the players are, but it doesn't guarantee that their behavior will change, because the equilibrium itself hasn't been disrupted. That's the key limitation. In sum, the anti-political dynasty bill is one of the most promising reforms out there. It has a constitutional basis, it has strong empirical support, and it makes sense as a way to change the composition of who holds power. But historically, it has failed again and again because it asks dynastic politicians to legislate against themselves. And even if it did pass, it wouldn't automatically change the deeper incentives that keep the system locked in this cycle. So, if the anti-dynasty bill is one path, it can't be the only one. We have to look beyond it. What else can be done to shift the equilibrium? In the next video, I'll start with another equally promising proposal: reforming the party system in the Philippines.